have talked a lot about disturbances, shaping plant communities and so forth. So here we have, and I want you to observe, so you got a parking lot here, right? Then you have a road that goes here, and then it disappears. Why? Why is that, right? Why would you build a road in underneath it? They did not. And in the mid-90s and earlier on, there was, it circled all the way around, and then there was a similar parking lot out there, and then there was the beach. So in the latter half of 1990s, I can't remember exactly the year, all of that disappeared one night in a big storm. It got completely eroded away. One night. A storm, yeah. Big windstorm, it all disappeared. So what we're having here is we are really having an incredibly dynamic landscape. And I think if you ask the tourist that comes here, you know, what it's going to look like in 10 years, and they're going to say, oh, this is probably going to look the same. It's a national park. Nothing's happening here, right? But there's really an enormous amount of disturbances and shaping the landscape constantly. And it looks different every year. Okay? The other thing about this particular park, there's actually some invasive species. There's some English ivy there. And there's also a Japanese knotweed that is invasive in the delta that we're going to stop at. So, for some reason they haven't really tried to get rid of it. But let's go out to the beach and then talk a little bit about how the marine environment and the terrestrial, the forest landscape, and the watershed interacts. All right.
Yeah, let's set another picture of you. Picture of you with your tongue out. Tell your friends.
We're inside the Olympic National Park. There's a strip along the coast here that belongs to the national park, and it also extends out into the ocean here. And so there's a marine reserve out here. So that means we have a piece of coastline that's the longest undeveloped coastline in the lower 48 states. Okay, all the way up from Nia Bay and way south of the coast. Okay, so we have an opportunity to observe all of these dynamic processes without us interfering, right? So, one of the things when we talk about sustainability and managing natural resources in a sustainable manner, that means that we have to understand the processes that shape those resources, right? Because if we go against those, we're going to be losing biodiversity. So, you have forest lands there, you've got a marine environment here, and then you have a river coming out that's draining in our enormous watershed. It can be large or small. So look at that log there. That's an overall Sitka spruce, right? And if you're looking at the trees that are growing right there, it clearly did not come from there, right? It must have come from someplace else. These large trees here, there's a process where trees fall into the river and then they get transported out, they get pumped out during the storm, and then the wind will push them in, and then the waves will form all the way up here. Okay? You can sort of imagine the size of the wave that it needs to be to move this. Right? So there's a lot, so they slowly break down. Great habitat for a lot of wildlife. So the rivers are really sort of subsidizing the coastline. Not only with wood, particulate matter, organic matter, and a lot of nitrogen from the alder. Red alder fixes nitrogen, and that leaks out of the ground in the riparian zone, and then it comes out here. Okay? All that particular matter right here with the wave, right? It's constantly being sort of broken down. But that means that here is a really, really rich environment to live in. Because there's a lot of nutrients. If there's a lot of nutrients, that means there's a lot of algae, there's a lot of organisms, there's a lot of filter feeders. And so it's a really, really good place to be. And unfortunately, there's not bird species today, but usually there's a lot of pelicans coming up, flying around, cormorants, lots of seals and sea lions, but today I guess we're larger. You can also see that haze that are here, right? That it's always present. And today is actually an incredibly clear day. This is unusually sort of calm. That sort of moist haze moves inland, right? It contains a lot of salt spray. That salt spray is what's killing the tree. So Sitka spruce, which is what's dominating the forest here, and we'll talk more about that later today, but they're a little bit salt tolerant. But they're only salt tolerant because we also get a lot of rain. So that washes some of that salt out of the soil. So that helps a little bit. What I think we should do is we can start to go and explore a little bit and see what is being washed up, right? All of this stuff that gets washed up, various kinds of algae, it starts to decompose, lots of insects in it. You've got lots of insects, you've got lots of birds, right? Shorebirds, also birds. So then marine critters get washed up, all sorts of stuff coming up on the beach, making this a very rich environment. So when we talk about ecosystem, we often talk about a lake ecosystem, when we talk about a forest ecosystem, or a marine environment. But there's lots of exchanges of energy and nutrient across those boundaries. So you can't just manage this by itself, because it interacts with the ocean and vice versa. Does that make sense? Right? If you've got interaction, you've got to co-manage those systems, right? So let's go and explore a little bit, and everybody see if they can find something that looks a little different. So we'll have about 10 minutes for that.